I was alone on that dusty Texas road. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, a sound that felt like the earth itself was whispering secrets to the soles of my feet. The sun was beginning its slow, bleeding descent over the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and burnt orange. It's funny how clarity often comes when you are surrounded by nothing but miles of barbed wire and mesquite trees. Standing there, listening to the wind howl through the long grass, I wasn't the high-powered executive anymore. I wasn't the woman in the $600 heels trying to outrun her own shadow. I was just a soul, stripped bare by the vastness of the landscape. But to understand why I was standing there, crying tears of gratitude into the dry dirt, you have to go back. You have to leave this peace and step into the noise. You have to go back to a night in Dallas 15 years ago, inside a place that smelled of money, desperation, and expensive cologne. A place called the Gilded Horn. I remember the temperature first. It was freezing. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that suggested nature was something to be conquered, not lived in. I sat at a corner table, the best in the house, or so Julian, the maître d', had assured me with an oily smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was wearing a black dress that cost more than my first car, and my hair was pulled back so tight it gave me a headache. I was 28 years old, a junior partner at a brokerage firm, and I was starving. Not for food, I had lost my appetite hours ago, but for validation. Across from me sat two men. Let's call them the Wolves. They were potential clients, heavy hitters in the oil industry, men who chewed up people like me for sport. They were drinking a vintage Cabernet that I couldn't afford, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and looking at me with eyes that assessed my value like I was a piece of livestock at an auction. "So, Elizabeth," one of them said, swirling his wine glass, "tell us again why we should trust a girl from, where was it? Oklahoma." "East Texas," I corrected, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling beneath the pristine white tablecloth. "And you should trust me because I work harder than anyone in this city." I was lying to myself. I wasn't working hard. I was drowning. My credit cards were maxed out to maintain the facade of success. My rent was late. My soul felt like it was being eroded, grain by grain, by the pressure to be someone I wasn't. But in the Gilded Horn, weakness was the only sin. The restaurant was a symphony of excess. Crystal glasses clinking, silverware scraping against fine china, the low hum of deals being struck in the shadows. It was a temple of vanity. And then, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. The sound of the city traffic roared in for a split second, horns, sirens, the life of the streets, before the doors closed again. But the silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a celebrity walking in. It wasn't a politician. Standing in the entryway, framed by the artificial light of the chandelier, was a man who looked like he had just stepped off a horse. He was wearing Wrangler jeans, starch stiff, yes, but you could see the faint line of dust on the hem. His shirt was a simple plaid button-down, tucked in with military precision. On his feet were boots that had seen mud, rain, and work. Real work. Not the kind of work we did in that room, moving numbers on a screen, but the kind of work that puts calluses on your hands and an ache in your back. And on his head, he wore a white resistal hat. The room stopped. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The wolves across from me stopped laughing. The judgment in the air was so thick you could taste it. It was bitter. It was cruel. In a place where Italian silk was the uniform, this man was an alien. He was an affront to their carefully constructed world of exclusivity. I watched him. I judged him too. God help me, I did. I looked at his boots and thought, why? Why come here? Don't you know you don't belong? Don't you know you're embarrassing yourself? I was so terrified of not belonging that I projected my insecurity onto him. I wanted him to leave, so I wouldn't have to feel the second-hand shame of his difference. But the man didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look defiant either. He just looked calm. His eyes were shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his posture was easy, relaxed. He wasn't fighting the room. He was simply existing in it, completely unbothered by the eyes boring into him. Julian, the maitre d', descended on him like a vulture. I could see Julian's nose wrinkle in distaste. He blocked the man's path, crossing his arms over his tuxedo. I strained to hear the conversation. The restaurant was so quiet now that the whispers carried. "Can I help you, sir?" Julian asked, the word "sir" dripping with condescension. The man smiled. It was a gentle smile, one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He reached up and took off his hat, holding it against his chest. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples. "Good evening. Just looking for a quiet meal if you have a table." His voice. It was a baritone rumble, soft and steady, like a river flowing over smooth stones. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that the loud voices of the wolves at my table lacked. Julian sighed, making a show of checking his empty reservation book. "We have a strict dress code, sir. Jackets are required for dinner service." He gestured vaguely at the man's plaid shirt. "I understand," the man said. He didn't argue. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He didn't pull out a wad of cash to bribe his way in. He just stood there, hat in hand, respectful of a rule that was being used as a weapon against him. "I've been on the road a while, didn't pack a jacket. I can sit at the bar or maybe in the back." The humility of the request seemed to irritate Julian even more. It's hard to bully someone who refuses to be insulted. Julian looked around the room, performing for his audience. He saw us watching. He saw the smirks on the faces of the wealthy patrons. He decided to make an example. "Very well," Julian said, his voice clipped. "I can seat you, but it will have to be out of the way." He led the man not to a booth, not to a table by the window, but to a small, wobbly two-top right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was the penalty box. Every time a waiter burst out with a tray of steaming food, the man would be hit with a gust of hot air and noise. It was a humiliation tactic. The man didn't flinch. "That'll be fine, thank you." He walked through the dining room. I watched him pass my table. Up close, I smelled him. He didn't smell like the cloying cologne of the men I was with. He smelled of rain, sagebrush, and starch. It was a clean, honest smell. As he passed, he nodded to the wolves. "Evening, gentlemen," he said softly. "Ma'am." He looked me right in the eye. His eyes were blue, piercingly blue, but warm. For a second, just a split second, I felt like he saw through the expensive dress and the makeup, straight to the terrified little girl from East Texas hiding underneath. The wolves didn't respond. One of them actually turned his back on him. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. I wanted to say hello. I wanted to nod back, but I didn't. I was a coward. I looked down at my plate, pretending to be interested in my risotto, terrified that if I showed kindness to the cowboy, I would lose status in the eyes of my clients. The man sat at his tiny table by the kitchen. He placed his hat on the empty chair opposite him, treating it with more care than most of the men in that room treated their wives. "Can you believe that?" one of the wolves sneered, gesturing with his fork. "They let anyone in these days, places going to the dogs. Look at him. Probably thinks this is a saloon." I forced a laugh. It tasted like bile in my throat. "Right," I said, my voice hollow. "Probably parked his horse out front." We laughed. We mocked him. And all the while the man sat there unfolding his napkin completely at peace, while I sat in the best seat in the house, feeling like I was slowly suffocating. The night wore on. The wine flowed. The bill grew. I kept glancing over at the kitchen doors. The service for the man was atrocious. Waiters walked past him, ignoring his empty water glass. When his food finally arrived, a simple steak, it looked like it had been thrown onto the plate. Yet he ate with a slow, deliberate grace. He didn't rush. He looked like a man who savored things. He looked like a man who knew the value of a meal. In contrast, my table was a chaotic mess of gluttony. We ordered appetizers we didn't eat, bottles of wine we didn't finish. The wolves were getting louder, their hands wandering closer to my side of the table, their comments becoming more inappropriate. I played the game, I smiled, I deflected. I prayed for the night to end. Then the moment of reckoning arrived. "Check, please," I called out to the waiter. The leather folder arrived on a silver tray. I opened it. The number at the bottom was staggering. It was more than my rent. It was more than I had in my checking account. But that was okay. I had the corporate card. I had the platinum card. I was Elizabeth, the rising star. I could handle this. I placed the heavy black card on the tray with a flourish. "It's on me, gentlemen." A A pleasure doing business with you." The waiter took the card and walked away. The wolves leaned back, picking their teeth, looking satisfied. "Well, Elizabeth," one said, "if the card clears, maybe we'll sign those contracts next week." He was joking, or maybe he wasn't. 5 minutes passed. The waiter didn't return. 10 minutes. I started to sweat. The air conditioning suddenly felt non-existent. I saw the waiter whispering to Julian at the computer terminal. Julian looked over at our table. His expression wasn't one of concern. It was one of predatory delight. The waiter walked back. He didn't bring the receipt to sign. He brought the card back. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, loud enough for the next table to hear. The card was declined. The silence at my table was deafening. "Try it again," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It must be a chip error. Swipe it." "We tried it 3 times, ma'am. Declined. Codes 05. Do not honor." The wolves exchanged a look. The respect, or the illusion of it, evaporated instantly. Their eyes went cold. "Here," I said, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open my purse. I pulled out my personal card, my emergency card. It had a limit of $2,000. I prayed the bill was under that. I knew it wasn't. "Try this one." The waiter took it with a sigh of impatience. He walked away. The walk to the terminal seemed to take hours. I watched Julian swipe it. I saw the red light on the machine. Julian picked up the card and walked over to the table himself this time. He held the card between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Declined," Julian announced. He didn't whisper. He projected. The restaurant had gone quiet again. The show was better than the food. The high-powered woman was crashing and burning. "Both cards are maxed out, miss. Do you have another form of payment?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I checked my purse. I had $40 in cash. The bill was over $800. I can call my bank," I stammered. "There must be a mistake. Fraud protection." "The mistake," one of the wolves said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "was thinking you were in our league, honey." He threw his napkin on the table. "We're leaving, and we won't be signing anything. I don't do business with people who can't pay for dinner." "Please," I begged, reaching out. "It's just a technicality. Sit down." "Julian," the client said, ignoring me. "Call security if she can't pay. I don't want to be associated with this." They walked out. They left me there, alone. The room was spinning. The walls of the Gilded Horn were closing in on me. I was 28, and my life was over. I was going to be arrested. I was going to be fired. I was going to lose everything. Julian loomed over me. "Miss, if you cannot pay, I am legally obligated to call the police. We have a zero-tolerance policy for theft of services." "I'm not a thief," I whispered, tears finally spilling over, ruining my perfect makeup. "I'm not." "Then pay," Julian sneered, "or get up and wait in the office while the officers arrive." Everyone was watching, the women in their diamonds, the men in their suits. They watched with a mixture of pity and disgust. I was the entertainment. I was the cautionary tale. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing quietly, the shame burning hotter than fire. And then I heard it. The scrape of a chair against the floor. It came from the back of the room, from the penalty box, from the table by the kitchen. Boots, slow rhythmic footsteps, clack, clack, clack. The sound cut through the murmurs of the room. The footsteps stopped right beside me. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I was too ashamed. Then a hand rested on my shoulder. It wasn't a hand that grabbed or pushed. It was a heavy, warm hand. A hand that felt like an anchor in a storm. It was rough. I could feel the calluses even through the fabric of my dress. But the touch was incredibly gentle. "Seems to me," a voice said, that deep baritone river of a voice, "that these machines are always breaking down when it's humid out. Ain't that right, Julian?" I looked up. Through my blurry, tear-filled vision, I saw him. The man in the white hat. He was standing next to my table, looking down at me not with pity but with a fierce, protective kindness. He wasn't looking at my expensive dress or my ruined makeup. He was looking at me. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, a clean white cotton square, and offered it to me. "Dry your eyes, darling," he said softly. "Nobody cries on a full stomach. It's bad for digestion. Julian sputtered. Sir, please return to your seat. This is a matter between the establishment and this woman. It does not concern you. The man in the hat slowly turned his head to face Julian. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a steeliness that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. It concerns me, he said, because where I come from, you don't kick a person when they're down, and you certainly don't humiliate a lady just because your little plastic machine is having a bad day. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans. He didn't pull out a black card. He didn't pull out a phone to call a lawyer. He pulled out a silver money clip. It was tarnished, old, holding a thick fold of cash. How much is the bill? He asked. Sir, it's over $800, Julian said dismissively. I doubt you have. The man didn't let him finish. He started peeling off $100 bills. 1, 2, 3. He placed them on the table with a deliberate snap. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That covers the ladies' dinner, he said. He peeled off 3 more. That covers the 2 gentlemen who left, though I'm not sure they deserve it. He peeled off 2 more. And that covers my steak, which was overcooked, by the way. He placed the remaining stack on the table, another $500 at least. And that, he said, pointing a finger at the stunned waiter, is for the boy, because he's just doing what he's told, and I know he's got rent to pay, too. The room was silent, dead silent. Julian stared at the cash. It was real. It was more money than he made in a week. Sir, Julian stammered, his arrogance crumbling. I didn't realize. You didn't realize a lot of things, the man said. He looked back at me. He winked. A genuine conspiratorial wink. Come on, he said to me, extending a hand. Let's get out of here. The air in here is a little too thin for my liking. I took his hand. It was rough and warm. As I stood up, my legs shaking, I saw something. A man at the table next to us, an older gentleman with white hair, had stood up. He was staring at the man in the hat with his mouth open. He looked like he had seen a ghost. My God, the older man whispered. That's George Strait. The whisper traveled like wildfire. George Strait. It's George Strait, the king of country. The realization hit the room like a physical wave. The disdain turned to shock. The shock turned to awe. The same people who had mocked him 5 minutes ago were now scrambling to get a better look, their faces pale with the realization of their own stupidity. But George didn't look at them. He didn't acknowledge the whispers. He didn't take a bow. He just kept his hand on my elbow, steadying me. Keep your head up, he whispered to me as we walked toward the door. Walk like you own the place, because dignity is the one thing they can't charge you for. We walked past Julian, who was bowing and scraping now. Mr. Strait, please, let us comp the meal. Please, stay for dessert. We have a private room. George didn't even break stride. He just tipped his hat. No, thank you, Julian. We've had enough. We walked out the heavy oak doors, leaving the crystal and the cold air behind, and stepped out into the humid, noisy, beautiful Dallas night. The heavy door of the Gilded Horn clicked shut behind us, severing the connection to that world of crystal and cruelty. The silence of the restaurant was instantly replaced by the humid, roaring symphony of a Dallas night. The air was thick, smelling of exhaust fumes, wet asphalt, and the impending storm that had been threatening the city all afternoon. I stood on the curb, my expensive heels teetering on the concrete, and I felt my knees give way. It wasn't a faint, it was a collapse of the spirit. The adrenaline that had kept me upright during the confrontation with Julian and the wolves evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow trembling that rattled my very bones. I reached out, grabbing the rough brick of the building's exterior to steady myself, gasping for air. Beside me, the man in the white hat didn't rush me. He didn't offer empty platitudes like, "It's okay," or "Don't worry." He knew, with an instinctive wisdom, that it wasn't okay. He simply stood there, a solid, unmoving presence in the chaos of the city, shielding me from the view of the valet parking attendants who were staring with curious eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of gum, offering me a piece. It was such a mundane, normal gesture that it almost made me laugh, but a sob caught in my throat instead. "Breathe," he said. his voice low and grounding. "Just breathe in the night air. It's dirty, but it's real. It's better than what was in there." I took a shaky breath, the taste of ozone and gasoline filling my lungs. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to thank you. I will pay you back, I swear. I have a bonus coming next month, and if I just call the bank in the morning..." He held up a hand, silencing my frantic babbling. "Elizabeth, right? That's what they called you?" I nodded, wiping a smudge of mascara from my cheek. "Yes, Elizabeth." "Well, Elizabeth, money is the least of your problems right now," he said. He looked out at the street, watching the cars stream by, red taillights bleeding into the darkness. "You're shaking like a leaf in a tornado. You can't drive in this state." "I have to go," I whispered, panic rising again. "If I go back to the office now, maybe I can email the clients. Maybe I can apologize. Maybe I can fix it." George turned to me, and under the streetlights his face was a map of rugged kindness. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and sternness. "Darling, those men didn't leave because your card was declined. They left because they are sharks, and they smelled blood. There is no fixing that, and frankly, if you spend one more minute chasing people who treat you like furniture, you're going to lose a lot more than a commission check." His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. I knew he was right. But admitting it meant admitting that the last 5 years of my life, the climbing, the clawing, the sacrificing of my identity, had been for nothing. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the valet stand. The valet, a young kid with acne and a vest that was too big for him, was staring at George with his mouth slightly open. He held a set of keys in his hand, trembling slightly. "Mr. Strait," the kid squeaked. I brought your truck up, sir. It's right here." George smiled at the kid, a genuine, warm smile that probably made the boy's year. "Thanks, son. Keep the change." He pressed a bill into the kid's hand. Parked right in front of the line of sleek Mercedes and BMWs was a truck. It was a heavy-duty Chevrolet, black, dually wheels, with a brush guard on the front that looked like it could push a locomotive off the tracks. It wasn't a pristine pavement princess truck that never saw dirt. This truck had mud on the tires and a trailer hitch that was rusted from use. It was a working machine. George opened the passenger door for me. It was high up. I had to hike up my designer dress to climb onto the running board. As I sat down on the leather seat, the smell hit me. It didn't smell like the new car scent spray the dealership used on my leased Audi. It smelled of old leather, diesel, and horses. It smelled like home. It smelled like the East Texas ranch I had run away from 10 years ago. George climbed into the driver's seat, the door closing with a heavy, reassuring thud that shut out the world. He didn't start the engine immediately. He just sat there for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. "Where do you live, Elizabeth?" I hesitated. My apartment was in a high-rise uptown, a glass box in the sky that I could barely afford. It felt cold and sterile just thinking about it. Uptown. The Aurelia Towers. He nodded, turned the key, and the diesel engine roared to life, a deep guttural purr that vibrated through the floorboards. He pulled out into traffic, merging with an ease that suggested he wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere, but he wasn't going to let anyone stop him either. The drive was quiet for a long time. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the pavement and the rhythmic thrum of the engine. I stared out the window, watching the city blur by. The shame was beginning to curdle into a deep, aching sadness. "I'm from a town called Kilgore," I said suddenly. I don't know why I told him. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the fact that he was a stranger, and strangers are sometimes easier to talk to than friends. My dad worked in the oil fields. My mom cleaned houses. George didn't look away from the road, but I saw him nod. Kilgore. Good people in Kilgore. Rough country, though. I hated it, I confessed, the words spilling out. I hated the dust. I hated the smell of grease on my dad's clothes. I hated how everyone knew everyone's business. I swore that when I grew up, I was going to be someone. I was going to live in a place where the air was conditioned and the floors were marble. I wanted to matter. I looked down at my hands, clenching the strap of my purse until my knuckles turned white. And tonight I realized that, to those men, I matter less than the wine they were drinking. I'm just a waitress in a more expensive suit. George signaled and changed lanes, heading away from the city center, taking the long way toward uptown. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I've spent a lot of time around horses, And there's a thing about a horse. You can put a fancy saddle on him, you can braid his mane, you can polish his hooves until they shine like mirrors. But if that horse doesn't have heart, if he doesn't know who he is when the gate opens, and he's just a show pony, and show ponies don't last on the ranch. He glanced at me. You're trying so hard to be a show pony, Elizabeth, that you forgot you're a workhorse, and there is no shame in being a workhorse. That's where the strength is. I don't have any strength left, I whispered, a tear sliding down my nose. I'm maxed out, literally and figuratively. That dinner, that was my Hail Mary. If I don't land that account, I can't make rent. I can't pay the lease on my car. I'm going to lose it all. George drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Let me ask you something. If you lost it all tomorrow, the apartment, the car, the job, would you die? I paused. No, I wouldn't die. But I'd be a failure. According to who? He asked sharply. According to Julian the waiter? According to those 2 suits who walked out on you? Their yardstick is broken, darling. You can't measure your worth with a ruler that's crooked. We were stopped at a red light. He turned to face me fully now. The shadows of the streetlights played across his face. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from a life lived fully. But his eyes were incredibly alert. I've had years where the cattle prices dropped so low I thought I'd lose the ranch, George said quietly. I've had years where the rain didn't come and the grass turned to dust. I've stood on stages in front of 50,000 people screaming my name. And I've stood alone in a hospital room praying for a miracle that didn't come. And I can tell you this, none of the money, none of the awards, none of the applause meant a damn thing in the dark moments. The only thing that kept me standing was knowing that I hadn't sold my soul to get there. He pointed a finger at my chest, not aggressively, but with emphasis. You kept your soul tonight, Elizabeth. You didn't leave. You didn't run out on the bill. You stayed and you faced the fire. You were terrified, but you stood your ground. That's grit. You can't buy grit at Neiman Marcus. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was a loosening of the knot that had been there for years. For the first time in forever, someone was validating me, not for what I achieved, but for who I was in my lowest moment. Why did you help me? I asked again. You don't know me. You're George Strait. You could have just ignored it. He chuckled softly, shifting the truck back into gear as the light turned green. I helped you because I saw myself. A long time ago, before the records, before the tours, I was in a diner in San Marcos. I was broke. I was hungry. And a stranger paid for my burger. He didn't ask for anything. He just said, pass it on. I'm just settling an old debt, Elizabeth, that's all. We pulled up to the curb in front of the Aurelia Towers. The building was magnificent, a spire of glass and steel reaching for the stars. But looking at it from the cab of that dirty Chevy truck, it looked like a prison. It looked cold. The doorman, dressed in a livery that looked ridiculous compared to George's simple shirt, stepped forward, looking confused by the truck. George put the truck in park, but didn't unlock the doors yet. He turned to me one last time. You have a choice to make tonight, he said. You can go up to that tower, cry yourself to sleep, and wake up tomorrow trying to be the person those men want you to be. You can beg for your job back. You can keep playing the game. He paused, letting the engine idle. Or, he continued, you can realize that the fence you've built around yourself is made of barbed wire, and it's cutting you every time you move. Maybe it's time to tear down the fence and build something real. Go back to Kilgore, or go somewhere else. But stop trying to plant corn on a sidewalk. Nothing grows there. I looked at him. I etched his face into my memory. The lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his hands looked on the wheel, capable, weathered hands. Thank you, I said, and my voice was stronger now. Thank you for the dinner and for the ride and, for the rest. Don't thank me, he said, tipping the brim of his hat. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Next time you see someone stuck in the mud, he said, don't drive by, pull over. We all get stuck sometimes. I nodded. I promise. I opened the door and climbed down. The humidity wrapped around me again, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like an embrace. I slammed the heavy door shut. I stood on the sidewalk and watched as the king of country checked his mirrors, signaled, and pulled the big truck away from the curb. I watched the taillights fade into the Dallas traffic, until they were indistinguishable from the thousands of other lights. I was alone again, but the feeling was different. I looked up at the Aurelia Towers. I looked at the golden revolving doors. I thought about my empty apartment on the 30th floor. I thought about the maxed-out credit cards on my kitchen counter. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took off my high heels. I stood barefoot on the warm concrete of the city. I picked up the shoes, the symbols of the life I couldn't afford and didn't want, and I dropped them into the nearest trash can. I walked into the lobby barefoot. The doorman stared at me, scandalized. "Miss Elizabeth," he asked, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, Henry," I said, and for the first time in my life I meant it. "I'm better than fine. I'm done." I went up to my apartment. I didn't cry, I didn't panic, I packed a bag. Just the essentials, jeans, t-shirts. The photo of my parents I had hidden in a drawer. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the city lights one last time. George was right. I had been planting corn on a sidewalk. I'd been starving my soul to feed my ego. The encounter hadn't just saved my evening. It had shattered the mirror I had been staring into. I saw the cracks. I saw the distortion. And I knew with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity that I could never go back to the Gilded Horn. But the story doesn't end there. Because George Strait didn't just leave me with a paid bill and a ride home. He left me with a ghost of the woman I was supposed to be. And chasing that ghost would lead me down a road far dustier and far harder than I could have ever imagined. The sun was coming up by the time I crossed the county line into East Texas. The sky was a bruised purple, bleeding into a soft, hopeful pink. I was driving a rental car because the repo man had come for the Audi at 4 a.m. just as I was zipping up my duffel bag. I handed him the keys with a smile that confused him. He expected screaming. I gave him relief. I didn't go back to Kilgore immediately. I stopped in a town called Lindale, just a speck on the map compared to Dallas. I had $2,000 to my name, the last of my savings, and a resume full of skills that meant nothing out here. Mergers and acquisitions doesn't help you bale hay. Corporate strategy doesn't help you fix a fence. But I remembered the smell of George's truck, that scent of work. I got a job as a waitress at a diner off Interstate 20. It was the kind of place where the menu was laminated and sticky, and the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. The first week, my feet bled. My back ached in ways I didn't know were possible. I went from making 6 figures to making tips in a jar, and I loved it. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't selling a lie. When I poured coffee, I was just pouring coffee. When I smiled at a trucker, it wasn't because I wanted his investment portfolio. It was because he looked tired and needed a smile. I was stripping away the varnish, layer by layer, finding the wood underneath. 6 months in, I saw a help wanted sign at a local supply co-op. They needed someone to manage the books. The owner, a gruff old man named Mr. Henderson, looked at my resume and laughed. "You worked at a brokerage firm in Dallas?" he wheezed, looking at my jeans and work boots. "What are you doing here, girl? Witness protection?" "Something like that," I said, channeling the calm I had seen in the white hat. I realized I was a workhorse trying to be a show pony. "I'm looking for a place to pull my weight." He hired me on the spot. The years that followed weren't easy. There were no movie montages of instant success. There were nights I cried over bills. There were times the roof leaked and I had to use buckets to catch the rain. But every time I felt the panic rising, every time the old Elizabeth tried to whisper that I was a failure, I replayed that drive in the Chevy dually. The value of a man is what he does when the card doesn't pass. I worked my way up. I bought into the co-op, I expanded it. I didn't buy a glass tower, I bought a small plot of land with a wraparound porch. I learned to ride again. I got a dog, a blue heeler named Strait, a private joke, just for me. 10 years passed. The sharp edges of my Dallas life had been smoothed down by the wind and the work. I was 40 now. I had lines around my eyes, and my hands were rougher, but my grip was stronger. It was a Tuesday in November, when the echo of the past finally caught up with me. I was at the local feed store, the one I now owned, standing behind the counter checking inventory. The bell above the door chimed. A young woman walked in. She looked out of place. She was wearing a pantsuit that was too thin for the chill in the air, and heels that were sinking into the sawdust on the floor. Her car, a sleek sedan, was idling outside with steam pouring from under the hood. She walked up to the counter, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights. She looked like me. "Excuse me," she stammered, her voice high and tight. "My car overheated. I'm trying to get to a job interview in Shreveport. I'm already late. My phone is dead. Do you have a mechanic?" "We have a mechanic," I said, leaning on the counter, "but he's out on a call. Won't be back for 2 hours." The girl's face crumpled. She looked at her watch, a cheap knockoff of a luxury brand. "I can't wait 2 hours. This interview, it's everything. If I don't get this job, I don't know what I'm going to do." She started to dig through her purse. "I can pay extra. I have a credit card. Please, is there anyone else?" I watched her hands shake. I saw the desperation in her eyes, the sheer, unadulterated terror of falling off the edge of the world. I didn't call a mechanic. I walked around the counter. "What's your name?" I asked. "Sarah," she whispered. "Please, I just need to get there." I looked out the window at her steaming car. It was done. Even if we fixed the radiator, she wouldn't make it in time. "Sarah," I said, my voice dropping into that lower, steady register I had earned over the last decade. "Leave the car. My boys will tow it to the shop and fix it." "But I have to get to Shreveport," she cried, tears spilling over. I reached into the pocket of my jeans. My fingers brushed against cold metal, a silver money clip. I had bought it at a pawn shop 5 years ago. It wasn't the same one, but it felt the same. I pulled out a set of keys. "Take my truck," I said. Sarah blinked, staring at the keys in my hand. "What?" "Take my truck," I repeated. "It's the white Ford out front, full tank of diesel. It'll get you to Shreveport in an hour if you don't speed too much." I can't," she stammered, taking a step back. "You don't know me. I could steal it. I don't have insurance on a truck like that. I can't pay you." I took her hand. It was cold and clammy, just like mine had been that night outside the Gilded Horn. I pressed the keys into her palm and closed her fingers over them. "You're not going to steal it," I said firmly. "And you're not going to pay me. You're going to go to that interview. You're going to walk in there with your head high. And if you get the job, great. If you don't, you come back here, we fix your car, and you keep moving. Because a job interview doesn't define who you are, Sarah. It's just a meeting." She looked at me, stunned. "Why? Why would you do this?" I smiled. It was a smile that reached my eyes. "Because a long time ago," I said, "a cowboy gave me a ride when my wheels fell off. He told me to pass it on." She stood there for a moment, trembling, and then she threw her arms around me. It was a desperate, fierce hug. I held her, smelling the cheap perfume and the fear, and I absorbed it, grounding her. "Go," I said, gently pushing her toward the door. "Drive safe. And Sarah?" She turned at the door, the bell jingling. "Don't let them make you feel small," I called out. "You're a workhorse, remember that." She nodded, wiped her eyes, and ran to my truck. I watched her climb in, struggling a bit with the height just like I had, and roar out of the parking lot. I stood there in the silence of the store. The dust motes danced in the shaft of afternoon sunlight. I walked out onto the porch of the store and sat on the wooden bench. The Texas sky was vast and blue, stretching out forever. I took out the silver money clip and turned it over in my hand. I never saw George Strait again. I never went to a concert. I never wrote him a fan letter. I didn't need to. He wasn't a celebrity to me. He was a lighthouse. He had taught me that the measure of a life isn't in the harvest you reap, but in the seeds you sow. He taught me that dignity is quiet. He taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay the bill, tip your hat, and drive away without waiting for applause. I looked down at my boots. They were scuffed, muddy, and worn. They were beautiful. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves on the oak tree nearby. It sounded like a whisper. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and earth. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was whole. "Thanks, George," I whispered to the empty road. I put the clip back in my pocket, stood up and went back inside to work. There was inventory to count, and the day wasn't over yet.